Good morning to friends, colleagues and honourable guests. My name is Rick Walters and it's my absolute honour to MC this breakfast event to celebrate 10 years of the IS rating scheme. I was going to do acknowledgement of country, but we've got the real deal today, which is far better than me. So I'd like to introduce Alan Madden to give us a welcome to country. Alan.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Alan Madden, Gadigal Elder. For my first song, only kidding. Married man, not kidding. 10 children, 26 grandchildren, and 14 great-grandchildren. Yes, we did have TV. Just couldn't afford the bloody electricity. Welcome to country is always an honour and a pleasure for me. Just to give you a bit of an insight of where you are and who we are. Firstly, 2 apologies for the terrible weather we're having outside at the moment and not being able to welcome you to my country and my language, as we're forbidden to talk our language a long time ago. I'd like to acknowledge our First Nations and traditional owners of the lands that you may have come from and pay my respects. To all our Aboriginal elders, all elders, past and present, also pay my respects. To all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, from whatever Aboriginal or island nation you may have come from, welcome to Gadigal. And to all our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters here today, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. No matter where you've come from, whether it be across the seas, across the state or across town, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. And as I've mentioned many times before, was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Only 3 things shorter than that: coming, taxation and going. It's an honour and pleasure to be here this morning to welcome one and all to Gadigal. Gadigal is one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is bounded by nature's own, the Hawkesbury River to the north, Nepean to the west, and Georges River to the south. And in between those 3 mighty rivers is the Eora Nation. And in that nation, there are 29 clans, and the clan's land we're on today is Gadigal. On behalf of members of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. There's an old Aboriginal saying out there, I think it's very appropriate for you mob here today. They say where there's a will, there's relatives. So once again, on behalf of the Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alan. And I think it's highly appropriate today that we have that welcome, because this breakfast is about looking back and celebrating the past and successes achieved and honouring those that made it possible. The 10-year history we're going to celebrate today is nothing, though, compared to the history that came before, and in particular the lessons about living sustainably. They're embedded in the cultures of First Nations people in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand as well. Before we go much further, a little caveat. We're, on behalf of all the speakers today, we're going to be spending some time looking back, recalling past events. Now, memories are fickle, and even over just 10 years, we may not recall every event precisely. And I can guarantee that we will not mention every person that's made a contribution. So please don't feel slighted if your name doesn't get mentioned. Just know that that's more a reflection of our fading memories than any judgment about your contribution. That's the little fine print. Now, many of you know me, but for those who don't, I'm Rick Walters. My history with the Infrastructure Sustainability Council goes back to the very early days. I was one of the founding members of the first steering committee of what was then called AGIC, the Australian Green Infrastructure Council. And a little later, I was the first technical director leading the version 1 of the IS rating scheme. So for a time there, I considered the IS rating scheme my baby, with many others. And it was a difficult birth. I think people like Doug Harlan, David Hood, Glenn Hedges, Anthony Sprigg, David Singleton, myself and many others spent more than 2 years cajoling governments and companies to chip in to help bring it to fruition. And then there was the tool development itself, another roughly 2 years of working out with the industry what sustainability really means in the infrastructure space and developing a tool to measure it. So roughly 4 years in all, twice the gestation period of an elephant. For today, we've got we've got fruit salad on our table. So we've got a fruit salad of a menu in speakers to enjoy as well. And I think you'll get a lot out of it. And I'll start off with introducing our, sliced pears. The CEO of the Infrastructure Sustainability Council, the inimitable Ainsley Simpson, to open proceedings. Thanks, Ainsley.
Bajirigari Gamarua. I've missed Uncle Alan saying thank you for his welcome to country, but it is always important to recognise how interconnected the past, the present and the future are. So I also pay my respects to the Gadigal people and recognise their deep connection with land, water and culture. Well, it might be sliced pears and hopefully it doesn't go pear-shaped. So slowly, and then suddenly, ESG has gone from being a functional requirement to a commercial impediment. Once an issue, a consideration, ESG is now a market driver, an imperative for both the public and the private sector. It's essential for transparent disclosure and reporting on performance, integrating opportunity and risk management into operational strategy, and increasingly, at least in some global quarters, a direct response to regulatory requirements. But how does ESG, infrastructure and the council come together? Purposefully and intentionally. And this morning we have Moody's ESG to be thankful for bringing us all together and making this morning's executive breakfast possible. Infrastructure has widely become regarded as a comparatively low-risk asset class. Long-term investment horizons mean that, accordingly, there is reduced exposure to volatility, and in this period of time, it's quite extreme. Since the global financial crisis, the public, at least the private infrastructure market, has more than tripled in size. And government equally know that infrastructure is a great economic multiplier. For every dollar invested in public infrastructure, up to $4 in GDP is returned over the life of that asset. So now, in a COVID-induced infrastructure-led recovery, only sustainable infrastructure investment can ensure that we drive the economic rebound and an equitable transition that delivers a greater dividend for all. Now, the Infrastructure Sustainability Council has a clear purpose: ensuring that all infrastructure delivers social, cultural, environmental, and economic benefits. We work together with you to deliver on a purpose, which is ensuring a positive future for people, planet, and the economy. This year, as Rick mentioned, in fact, this week is a very, very significant anniversary. A decade since the Infrastructure Sustainability Council launched the IS rating scheme. This decade has been one of stewardship and determination. And I won't call out names because I honour every contributor and I would hate to do any offence. When we launched the scheme in 2012, David Singleton, our then chair at the time, said this: "We envisage the IS rating scheme will change design, construction and performance of Australia's infrastructure. With a common sustainability framework, investors can begin to quantify ESG aspects of a project or an asset, achieving appropriate value attribution as well as the identification of risk and cost reduction. Now, while David's unable to join us from Melbourne today, he was both respectfully righteous and resoundingly right. Today, over $210 billion of assets are under rating. The IS rating scheme now extends across the full asset life cycle. The benchmarks in terms of performance have shifted twice. And the scheme is being deployed across every state and territory in Australia, as well as Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it is being piloted internationally. It is delivering a compelling return. For every dollar invested, there is up to $2.40 return. And that's only on those matters that are easy to monetize. Can you imagine the upside if we were able to quantify non-financial benefits? Now, every season is born from the one prior. And today really is a powerful reminder that the past, the present, and the future are connected. Kamua kamuri. We walk backwards into the future. It's a Maori proverb that really resonates. Born on the 29th of February 2012, the rating scheme was championed by industry for industry. It was co-funded by government, the private sector, and the council as a not-for-profit. It was developed by an interdisciplinary A-team of subject matter experts. And I honour each and all contributors, including those here today, as well as those past who now walk beside us. Today we close out and celebrate a decade of determination, a decade made possible through collaboration, co-investment, and commitment from across our sector. A decade which we collectively invested to create not one, but two strategic assets for the infrastructure sector. The IS Rating Scheme and the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. The Council is transitioning from one season to our next, the decade of opportunity. Some things will change, some things will stay the same. Why we do it, how we do it, and what we do will not be changed. We'll continue to promote continuous ESG improvement. We'll build capacity and provide license to innovate. We'll do this by connecting and collaborating inclusively. And we'll deliver on our purpose and enable our vision, a positive future for people, planet, and the economy. Excuse me. Now, for the infrastructure sector and for our nations, one thing is certain: the coming century is one of change. A succession brought by external factors and a multitude of concurrent levers of change. Never has there been this level of collective awareness, appetite, and capacity for positive change. The shift raises up the importance of legacy and long-term investment, the recognition between the past, the present, and the future, the kinship that we share with nature and with one another. The purpose of infrastructure is to enable. It enables vibrant society, a society that is resilient, resourceful, and responsible. The purpose of our sector is enabling infrastructure for people, by people. Infrastructure enables people to thrive. As the leaders of our sector, a lot is at stake, not just for your organizations or our industry, but the lifestyles, the communities, and the economies that you enable, and the ecosystems which you impact. The coming decade presents a unique chance to turn risk and disruption into opportunity and advantage. That requires a bold new order of leadership, one that creates an operating environment of high coordination, high trust, high investment, and high return. Competitive advantage will not be defined by IP and patents, but rather by the speed at which we share. The faster we share innovations, the more we reduce the learning curve for those that are yet to follow. Participation and consultation will be replaced by genuine, long-sighted partnership with dialogue and co-design informing decision-making. And whether it is incremental or exponential, there will be pride in progress, and the outcomes will be openly celebrated to hasten our pace. The simultaneous global crises of COVID, climate change, social injustice, and destabilizing geopolitics, they'll be with us for some time, and their impact devastating and destructive. It has become clear, though, that commitment and co-investment and collaboration on ESG provides a really useful comfort and compass in times of change. So you are all part of our past. You are also all part of our pathway. As your strategic asset, the Council is your catalyst for contribution. It is a catalyst for competitive advantage. And most significantly, it is the catalyst to embed sustainability as our culture. So as we shift beyond a base of privilege, politics, and participation, purpose comes to the core. And our new drivers become progress, partnerships, and people. The Council provides a shared vision and a steady voice so that together we can work a fairly uncertain pathway together with focus and fortitude. So from the decade of determination, together we stride into the decade of opportunity. Let's make it a decade of dignity. Thank you.
Fantastic stirring words. Thanks, Ainsley. Next on our menu, we have the Strawberries with a virtual speech from the Honourable Catherine King. Kath has been the federal member for Ballarat since 2001, and after the 2019 election moved to the economic portfolio of Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. At the time of launch of the IS rating scheme, Kath was the Parliamentary Secretary for Transport, supporting the then Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, Anthony Albanese, and that department was one of the key supporters of the IS rating scheme. Catherine holds bachelor degrees in social work and laws and a master's in public policy, and as a regional MP is a strong advocate for the 7 million Australians who live outside our capital cities. And myself, I can speak as one of those, having resettled in Australia in Newcastle. Kath will reflect on the achievements of the last decade, as well as share her commitment and vision for sustainable infrastructure in Australia.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. I'm sorry I'm not able to join you in person, but I'd like to thank Deborah and Ainsley and the team at the Infrastructure Sustainability Council for providing me the opportunity to send this message. I acknowledge the traditional lands on which we all gather, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm coming to you from my hometown of Ballarat, so I particularly want to acknowledge the Wathaurong people. Today marks 10 years since Anthony Albanese, the then Minister for Infrastructure, launched the Infrastructure Sustainability Rating Scheme. And over the last 10 years, not only has the Infrastructure Sustainability Council gone from strength to strength, but the importance of building sustainability into the heart of our infrastructure has grown even more critical. Today, in part, because of the good work of the ISC, a road is not just a road and infrastructure is not just seen in terms of its raw materials, but what it contributes to our broader society. Whether it be in terms of social equity or environmental responsibility, building sustainable infrastructure has never been more important. Just as Anthony Albanese launched this scheme back in 2012, a government led by Anthony in 2022 would embed those principles as we build back stronger from COVID. A large part of this is in openly acknowledging the role that our infrastructure and transport plays in our changing climate. Transport is our third biggest and fastest growing source of emissions. Globally, we're ranked second last for transport energy efficiency. Yes, Australia is a large country and many of us and much of our freight travel large distances by road. But we have to do better. We're already seeing the private sector and the states and territories doing some of the work by investing in new technologies, sustainable fuels and active public transport. But we need leadership at a national level. We need a minister willing to work with industry and with the states, not to campaign against their clean changes. If I'm fortunate enough to be the minister after this year's election, I will make it a priority for my department to work across government and importantly with industry partners to identify reductions and offsets in our carbon emissions. Changing patterns of work, travel and living provide an opportunity to rethink pre-pandemic priorities. And as we remake them, we should include reducing emissions as a key goal. This would be in line with actions taken by our partners in the UK, Europe and the United States who understand the need to rebuild infrastructure in a more sustainable way. We wouldn't be making a hard break from the past, but we would be taking the next step into a more sustainable future. At the same time, infrastructure can be a powerful tool in combating climate change. It can also be used to tackle inequalities across suburbs, regions, cities and states. I don't need to tell this audience that infrastructure and transport are key enabling forces driving economic growth. They create jobs, boost productivity and improve lives. Labor wants to build infrastructure so that transport is not a constraint on people's lives, but instead it is an enabling force allowing Australians to thrive. Well-planned and well-built infrastructure means those in marginalised suburbs and regions can take advantage of opportunity. It allows wealth to spread to more marginalised communities and it allows people to live where they want. It builds a better, more connected nation. It's a way to genuinely improve people's lives, creating secure Australian jobs and delivering a better life for working families across this country. That is why bodies like the ISC are so important and it's why Labor has always supported it. It's a way of bringing industry together with governments so we can build a better future. If there's one thing we can say with confidence, it's that the decade ahead and the decades after that are an uncertain time. It's more important than ever that infrastructure is built thoughtfully in a way that allows us to tackle the challenge of climate change and to confront the inequalities that still exist in this society. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you today. I look forward to working with you all into the future and I wish you well in your deliberations.
Great, thanks very much from Kath. I'm sure she's getting the vibes back. Now on our menu, I guess Glenn's up the back there probably thinking, what fruit am I going to describe Glenn as? It could only be passion fruit. Glenn Hedges is an experienced leader and subject matter expert in infrastructure sustainability and innovation. He has over 25, look how young he is. He has over 25 years experience in delivery of transport and other civil engineering projects in Australia and New Zealand with the CIMIC Group and has assisted over 20 projects to achieve their IS ratings. His early vision, tenacity and passion contributed to the co-founding of AGIC, now the IS Council, and he continues to be deeply connected and one of the IS rating scheme's fiercest advocates. Again, serving on the board, he is well placed to review how far the rating scheme has come. Tell us, Glenn.
Thank you, Rick, and good morning, everybody. I've never equated myself as a passion fruit before, and I'm just going to go with the flow with that one. Thank you as well, Ainsley, for the opportunity to offer some reflections as to where we've come from and where we're going with respect to the infrastructure rating scheme. So, as Rick mentioned, whilst the first version of the rating scheme was launched 10 years ago, the story with the council started about 4.5 years ago when a group of like-minded volunteers got together, mostly engineers, and in Brisbane, and thought, we can do stuff better. We can deliver infrastructure better, create more value, reduce our risk profiles and whatnot. And that really set the scenes for what became the council and subsequently what the IS rating tool was. In many respects, there are many parallels to the circumstances of today to what there was 10 or 15 years ago. Decision making on projects is still based on a lowest cost compliance perspective. Project performance and success is defined by a narrow set of KPIs, dollars, program, quality, safety. The allocation of risk in our procurement processes usually hinder innovation and therefore act as a barrier to improving productivity. And we also recognise that the infrastructure that we're building today and maintaining relies on a huge amount of natural capital, which is depleting. So within this context was born the idea that a voluntary rating scheme, which is independently verified or certified, which rewards and recognises organisations that go beyond business as usual and short-circuit some of those paradigms I mentioned before, was the way that we could do things cheaper, faster, better, safer and greener in our industry. So back then, as Rick alluded, there were over 100 volunteers and founding members that started the organisation, and they shared this vision, which became what the Esg Council is now and what the rating scheme has become. In time, the original design and as-built rating scheme has evolved, and the rating schemes are now covering the planning phase and the operations phases. 2021 saw the introduction or the release of a new pilot IS Essentials rating scheme for smaller projects. And the evolution of those rating schemes continues to include the nuances of our New Zealand brothers and sisters. So, whilst the rating whilst the rate of evolving the rating scheme to maintain that healthy balance between updating, recognising business as usual, and continuing to stretch industry has created some challenges, we cannot lose sight of the fact that we have created some pretty big intrinsic benefits as a result of all of the efforts over the last 10 to 14 years. The first one is around the creation of a common and practical language of what sustainability means in the context of our industry and how this nebulous concept can be operationalized. I'm going to move that to the side a little bit, to create value for society and for the organizations and its shareholders. The rating scheme, secondly, has enabled the collection of a lot of data and best practices for a vast range of ESG performance metrics not commonly captured in traditional corporate reporting, which has helped us to better appreciate, communicate and benchmark our sustainability performance, our risks and our opportunities, both at a project, organisational level and an industrial level. To date, we've only scratched the surface of how we can realise the benefits of all of that data and information we've got. And I'm really excited in how we can use this information to generate future value and to improve the productivity of our industry. The third big benefit I wanted to mention was that the successful use of the rating scheme over the last 10 years has required practitioners tapping into multiple skill sets to influence and enable change and to encourage and recognise innovation. That's created a new profession of sustainability managers and practitioners, and they need to understand a vast range of technical issues over planning phases, design, construction, engineering, procurement, facilities management, and all the technical skills within that, as well as the soft skills around leadership, effective communication, and change management, and how to work with teams who are often accountable for achieving those outcomes rather than doing the work themselves. So that profession, the sustainability manager profession, is still in its infancy, and the demand for those experienced sustainability leaders and managers are currently far exceeding the supply. The key takeaway that I'd like to leave with you guys is to support and encourage those people and that profession because it's going to yield a short-term and long-term return on investment. And also, I'd like to encourage you to encourage them to continue engaging with the council and helping to evolve the rating scheme further to make sure that we're still delivering that value going forwards. So in closing, and on a personal level, I do admit to feeling humbled in seeing a lot of the impact and the legacy that the collective efforts of all of those volunteers who are operating on the smell of an oily rag 14 years ago, and usually on top of their existing day jobs and their normal life commitments, and they've been able to create the council and develop this rating scheme by industry for industry. The council and the rating scheme has come a long way in the last 10 years, and I extend my gratitude to those volunteers. I extend my gratitude to Ainsley and her team, both past and present. I extend that gratitude to the members of the board, both past and present. The rating scheme and its continuous improvement process is positioned, it's well positioned to help industry maximize value from its infrastructure investments, making our assets more resilient. And coming down from Brisbane, I can tell you a little bit about infrastructure resilience and the need for it. And also for making meaningful contributions to the broader issues that affect our communities, the environment, and our economy. Thank you for indulging my reflections, and thank you for your continued engagement and support of the IS Council. Together we can do better.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Some stirring words there, and I think the energy that I think we have and we certainly need now for the next decade, as alluded to by Ainsley as well, you know, it does feel a bit similar to those 10 to 14 years ago when it was just the twinkle in a few people's eyes. So I'm glad that, you know, people like yourselves are here with that energy burning to make some more changes in this next decade. We've got our keynote speech coming up next. Marie Diron, our French Apple, heads the Sovereign Risk Group for Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa, and Sub-Sovereign Risk Group for Asia Pacific and EMEA for Moody's Investor Services. She's based out of London and responsible for analytical teams covering sovereign ratings and MDBs, multilateral development banks. Marie is also rating group coordinator for Moody's Investor Services ESG scores. Marie has previously worked as director at Oxford Economics after a number of years at the European Central Bank and has qualifications in economics. So we've got today Marie on a live stream, which we'll just queue up, and hopefully that will all connect. And looking forward to hearing from a global and European perspective.
What I wanted to do in the next few minutes is explain to you why we as rating agencies are looking at ESG and how we're looking at ESG. I'll start really with the why, because after all, it may not be obvious to all of you. So as rating agency, our role in global financial markets is to inform investors about the risks that some issuers, corporates, governments, we look at issuers in a whole variety of sectors, the risks that they may not be able or willing to repay their debt. And when we think about these risks in the very near term, if we think about the capacity of a company to repay their debt due tomorrow, then that's very simple. I think we look at how much cash there is available, and that's really quite a simple assessment. But investors, the service we provide to investors is really to assess that risk several years, many years ahead. And the further out you go, the more you want to really widen the perspective and start integrating factors that over time are likely to influence that ability to repay debt. And that's really where environmental, social, and governance factors come in, because in our experience, we do see these factors being very relevant, whether it is physical climate change, when we think about sovereigns, and we rate 144 sovereigns around the world, so including not only Australia and New Zealand, but also some of your neighbors, so to speak, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, or Solomon Islands, for instance. And there we do see really the tangible impact of climate change. We also want to take into account the effects of carbon transition that might have on companies that rely on hydrocarbons as a source of revenue, for instance. Or we take into account the impact of demographics if we go into the social area, and what population aging, for instance, implies for a country like Japan, or may imply in the future for a country like Korea. So with that much wider lens, really, ESG are coming in, and the way we think about ESG factors is similar to the way we think about factors in general, which is an assessment of exposure, first and foremost. So an assessment about the nature and the severity of the risks or the opportunities that might present themselves, complemented by an assessment of resilience, by which we mean the financial and institutional means that the company or the government may be able to deploy to face these risks. And so we've been working on this and developing and refining our approach for a number of years. And recently, really, we've taken a step up, which is at a time when that analytical interest and analytical need has combined with first very clear investor demand. That is something that I have experienced personally, having I moved from London to Singapore and back to London, and through these transitions I've seen really the investor journey in that ESG assessment. And now there's really not a meeting that I have with investors or asset managers that doesn't mention ESG. We've also seen rising demands or questions from regulators around the world at different pace and different nature, but really regulators in Europe, in the Americas, and in Asia Pacific are all looking at these questions and are all asking us as rating agencies what our contribution to this perspective is. So with that, we've decided to crystallize that and summarize that analysis in the form of scores, as we heard earlier. And the benefits of the scores, so the ESG scores that we provide, convey that assessment of exposure and credit impact, and that's very important for us, the credit impact of ESG. And the definition and publication of these scores has been for us a way to formalize our analysis and make it a lot more transparent and accessible. And now we see that in this engagement with investors, asset managers, regulators, and issuers themselves, we increasingly rely on these scores as a way to really frame the analysis, ask questions, assess that not only the exposure but the resilience capacity. So we have a range of scores that cover now around 1,700 issuers globally. These scores cover around 25 corporates in Australia and New Zealand. We're ramping up our coverage. We cover the sovereigns, Australia and New Zealand as sovereigns, as well as the states and Northern Territory from a regional local government or regional government perspective. I had planned to share some slides, but I'll describe the pictures, the kind of the overall analysis that comes out of these scores. One thing I'll say before I get into that is that it's been very important for us and very useful to anchor this analysis in a sector analysis. So ultimately, we are after an assessment of the credit impact of ESG for each issuer. But what we find is that there are really commonalities within sectors, and that and there's really significant differentiation in terms of nature and severity of the risk across sectors just as much as within sectors. So we have a set of heat maps that are sector-based and that really anchor that analysis at the sector level to then look at the differentiation within a sector. So when we look at a topic like carbon transition, for instance, for oil and gas corporates around the world, we have that view at the sector level, which dimensions the effects of carbon transition for oil and gas sectors in comparison to, say, carbon transition for an auto manufacturing sector. And then we can look at within the sector, within the oil and gas sector, the differentiation, which are the most exposed corporates, which are the corporates that might be leading in terms of resilience, in terms of adaptation capacity. And overall, what we find, and I'll conclude on that with a description of the conclusion of that analysis for sovereigns, for countries generally, and then maybe a few words on the Australian side. For sovereigns globally, what we find is significant exposure to climate risk, both physical climate risk and carbon transition. On physical climate risk, as I said, we rate 144 sovereigns, which means that we rate a number of sovereigns on the equator. We rate small islands, mentioned Solomon Islands. We rate Maldives or islands in the Caribbean. All of which are exposed, as you know very well, to climate change, to severe weather events, to rising sea levels in some cases. And what we find is that these sovereigns also are not only exposed to this risk, but also their resilience capacity is, at this stage at least, relatively low, in that they tend to have lower income levels, they tend to have higher government debt, so lower financial capacity to or financial resources to mobilize towards this effort. They tend to have also typically weaker institutions, and so also weaker institutional capacity to define the adaptation that may mitigate the risks. Another piece of, and that comes out of this analysis, is that we find that quite often the environmental risks are correlated or are happening at the same time as social risks. And that is because increasingly in the debates and the approach to these risks, what we see is that what may be an environmental issue at the core has taken a social dimension. And so that is reflected in our scores in terms of really the capacity of governments or corporates to respond to these social trends that in a way that really protects their ability to repay debt. For the Australian and New Zealand entities that we rate, we position the environmental risks at a moderate level, and that is to reflect the existence of these risks, the presence of these risks, again, both physical climate change as well as carbon transition, but also on a global comparison basis, the relatively lower sensitivity given the fabric of the economy. Given the strength of the infrastructure network, given the strength of the healthcare system, all of that comes into consideration to give us an element of sensitivity to weather events that we judge is relatively moderate compared to some of the other sovereigns that we rate. Similarly, on the social side, we find that risks related to income levels, income inequality, distributional effects, provision of social services are relatively more moderate in Australia and New Zealand compared to some of the sovereigns that we rate globally. And that is the corporate system in Australia and New Zealand, whereby there, as I said earlier, our coverage is increasing in that respect. So far, the entities that we rate are mainly in the mining sector, some of them in the telecom sector, and in a few other sectors, where the climate exposure is one of the drivers of that assessment. but that is so far at least mitigated by relatively strong financial capacity and governance to mobilize towards this risk. So overall, I'm happy to take questions, but really what I wanted to leave with you is that this is a topic that is increasingly important in the discussions that we have with investors, asset managers. Decisions really increasingly based on these dimensions. That for us, we do see then corporates responding to that, planning the business model, their strategy in accordance to taking into account the risk that they face and taking into account in particular the investors' assessment of these risks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marie. You can hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Great,
very well.
great. We're going to open up to questions from the floor for a few minutes. Marie won't be able to hear you, so I will convey your question as best as I can. So let's get into it. Who's got a question? We've got one here.
So from all of the sovereign nations that you review, which is the one that gives greatest cause for hope? Who's getting it right?
Okay, so the question is, of all the sovereign nations you review, who is giving you hope? Who is getting things right?
In terms of climate adaptation, it's so there are a few, as far as physical climate risk is concerned, where we've seen, in general, I think the efforts and the thinking and the building of resilience is at an early stage. But we've seen very different examples from, and I'll stay in APAC just to be closer to you, very different examples from Singapore building resilience to rising sea levels, which so far, at least from what we can tell, seems to be quite effective or likely to be effective for really decades to come, to examples of sovereign countries with much lower income levels. Vietnam is another example, also significantly exposed to rising sea levels, and where there's more nascent effort, but there's some ambition to again build some protection. I take from that really it is a topic that is increasingly shaping policies, that is certainly shaping infrastructure investment. There's still, and I think that Carlos from CCRI is talking in this event as well, there's still a lot of evidence to share about what will be best in class in terms of really resilience of infrastructure to weather events. But countries like Singapore, countries like Netherlands in Europe are setting some of these examples.
Thanks, Marie. Another question? Okay, well, I might throw one at you then. I guess you're very heavily looking at risk in your ratings. Do you factor in any kind of assessment of opportunities? Some countries are much better placed in terms of taking opportunities, and that maybe is attractive to investors. How is that something that's considered or starting to be considered?
No, very, very good question. And indeed, our assessment is, whilst not being symmetric entirely, we do have in our scoring system scope for a positive assessment. And an example is New Zealand on natural capital. Our assessment there is that there's this really very high natural capital wealth that is effectively preserved, and that is really preserved in such a way that becomes a benefit to the economy, the population, society. And so that's really when that benefit threshold is being crossed, that we conclude to a positive effect. So this is an example, an area where we see these positive effects. We see positive effects on the social in the social spheres. Countries that establish really strong social provision to the point that really they become particularly attractive as a place to locate for people, for companies, that becomes a benefit. On the corporate side, there are examples, and one probably example that you may have in mind on carbon transition when we look at the auto sector would be a Tesla as really establishing itself as the leader, really the first mover in that area, and hence taking market share, and so that it really benefits. Again, it strengthens its capacity to repay debt.
Great. Thank you, Marie. Last chance for a question from the audience. Okay. Looks like we're all out. So, Marie, I just want to thank you very much for bringing those insights from an international perspective, outside looking into Australia. I think that's really valuable for us in the room, you know, living here and working every day, to hear particularly the investors' view from outside. And thanks very much to Moody's ESG for supporting the conference and the IS Council. Thanks very much. Great. And I think the other point that, you know, was really clear out of Marie's discussion, and myself coming from the investor space as well, is that these ESG issues are all intertwined. Much as you can put things in boxes and say, well, climate's environment, this is social, etc. They're very much intertwined, and at the end of the day, it makes sense to consider them across the board. And the other thing is that, and I've seen this very pronounced myself in Europe, is that investors are factoring these things in now. So these ratings that Marie's talking about, this is affecting investors' decisions now. They're about the future, of course. This is projections around ratings for the future. Is this a good investment because of what the future is going to bring? But it's affecting decisions now. It's affecting where money flows now. And that's got people very interested and very active, including in Australia. You know, I think we've seen governments getting very quickly attuned to the fact that the cost of capital is rising for Australia and for projects and things like that. So much as there might be, some of this might be happening in back rooms, people are very attuned to this, that this is a now issue, even though it's about the future in many ways. With that, on to our next, the next fruit is the pineapple, Dorte Eklund. Dorte's been close to the scheme since its launch in 2012, when she held the role of Executive Director of the Commonwealth Major Cities Unit. Many of us remember that fondly. And soon after, the Director General of the ACT Environment Sustainability Development Directorate. Dorte is an urban and regional planner and is passionate about sustainable, prosperous and living cities, along with resilience and climate action. Currently serving her second term as a board director of the IS Council, she's invited to share perspectives about how the Council has enabled more sustainable infrastructure investment and what the future holds. So with that, Dorte.
Thanks, Rick. I guess I can be a bit prickly at times. Wasn't quite expecting that, but fair enough. Firstly, Rick, I'd like to congratulate you and the whole vine of passion fruit that I guess were the catalyst for this journey that we're on today. It's a great pleasure for me to also reflect on the Infrastructure Sustainability Council 10 years on, I guess more than 10 years if you think about what preceded the rating tool. When we think about not-for-profit built environment organisations established by industry, for industry, to pursue more sustainable outcomes from their work, many would think about the Green Building Council of Australia, and I note that Davina is here today, rather than our Infrastructure Sustainability Council. And I guess that's no surprise, given the Green Building Council has been around twice as long as we have, inspired by the green credentials of the 2000 Sydney Olympics. The Green Building Council pioneers, many of them property developers or property owners, could understand the value proposition of differentiating their products, constructing more appealing green buildings that perform better in operational costs and attracted a premium to lease or to sell. The Green Building Council has very much broadened their tools, products and advocacy over the 20 years since they started. And they've even recently established a rating system for homes, which can be used across the country and indeed beyond Australia. So I think let's watch this space. It's now hard to imagine the Green Building Council not existing in Australia. And I guess it was therefore natural for professionals working in the infrastructure sector rather than in buildings to also aspire to leave a positive legacy for future generations and the environment that we all depend upon. As Rick mentioned, I was heading up the Major Cities Unit in the Federal Infrastructure Portfolio in 2010, when multiple federal departments, Minister Albanese, infrastructure organisations, public and private, lent their support for promoting improved sustainability outcomes in the infrastructure sector. And of course, as again we've heard, that was after strenuous lobbying from these passionate infrastructure professionals. I remember being very excited by the concept of a Green Infrastructure Council, and am now very proud of how this organisation has grown, matured and transformed to embrace the evolving sustainability challenges of our time. In 10 short years since the beginnings as AGIC and the release of the Infrastructure Sustainability Tool, the now Infrastructure Sustainability Council has become an increasingly prominent entity helping to shape infrastructure investments to promote economic and community prosperity, whilst also advancing our stewardship of the planet. And while the rating system is at the core of our value proposition to members, as Glenn mentioned, we should not discount the value of the Council itself as an important asset for our members. The Council is able to monitor and help members respond to contemporary demands on governments and the private sector, to be able to tackle a whole range of matters such as net zero emission ambitions, ESG that we've heard about, modern slavery, how we respond to the UN Global Sustainability Goals, and building resilience against extreme events exacerbated by climate change, as we are now so clearly experiencing in Australia, as we have done in recent other years as well. Also very importantly, and I think particularly for governments, membership of this council and use of the IS tools reflect a commitment to deliver better outcomes for our communities and the environment, helping to provide a social licence to deliver much needed infrastructure to our communities, the construction of which may be disruptive to some parts of the community and therefore cause political pain. Social licence can help alleviate political pain. The Infrastructure Sustainability Council and membership thereof demonstrates credentials that the subject infrastructure has been planned, designed, constructed and/or is operating not to the lowest common denominator, but credibly with an eye to contributing to a better future. So no matter the outcome of any election, it is critical that the momentum of the Infrastructure Sustainability Council not be diluted, and if anything, our momentum to net zero and enhanced environmental, cultural, social and economic outcomes is accelerated. Industry leaders, you have a very important role to play in communicating the merits of our shared aspirations in this regard. We need to be seen and heard rowing in the same direction and singing a consistent tune. It's essential for governments in particular to hear that we are communicating with one shared voice, albeit many individual voices. And if ever there was any doubt about the importance of the Council and your membership of it, just consider what we are now experiencing. While Western Australia's heat waves have been unprecedented and have been putting incredible pressure on that state, fueling bushfires, putting pressure on the community in terms of managing heat, here on the East Coast, we are experiencing a 1 in 1,000 year storm and flood event, and we haven't seen the end of it yet. There's no climate change happening here. Just in time for the release of the most recent IPCC report, which starkly announces that we are on the precipice of missing the opportunity to stave off catastrophic impacts on humankind, as well as planetary environmental systems and ecosystems. Infrastructure has an enormous role, responsibility and opportunity to reduce the severity of climate change and help support our communities and our economies to be resilient to locked-in changes that it is too late to mitigate. Folks, we must continue to innovate and improve practices. We must continue to be focused and ambitious. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorte. Fabulous. And Dorte's actually organised, there's a few rowboats just on the harbour there, and we're all going to be getting in after this and singing songs together. So thank you very much. No, seriously, with any good fruit salad, it needs to be finished off, and a dollop of yogurt is a good way to go, although our fruit salad, the yogurt was at the bottom, so maybe it's a bit different. But I'd like to introduce the new chair of the board of the Infrastructure Sustainability Council, Deborah Spring. Deborah is deeply familiar with driving system change, has a strong record in business transformation and extensive board experience. A mechanical engineer with an MBA from Harvard, she is currently the CEO of the Rail Industry Safety and Standards Board, and she previously held the role of chair in that organisation for 6 years with prior executive roles at Tasrail and Australia Post. I'd like you to welcome Deb for a final reflection and a call to action. Deborah.
Thank you very much, Rick, and thank you very much for not making me a fruit. I was kind of worried what you're going to actually do with me. Good morning, everyone. What a fantastic morning it's been, and what a fantastic journey. And I hope that you've really enjoyed getting together, networking, and hearing the history, and the strong history of the Council, but more important, where the Council is going. One of the Council's key roles is to support our thriving industry by bringing together the infrastructure sector to collaborate, through showcasing leadership, sharing knowledge, and building relationships. We are proud that you're a part of the community of collaboration, and proud that this is a true community of collaboration. Together, we are delivering intergenerational impact. All of you in this room play an important role in moving the industry forward. We see a key role for the Council in advocating to advance policy, standards, and specifications to help create systematic change which benefits all, ecosystems, communities, and economies. There are many in your value chains in the starting blocks. Invite them to stand side by side and learn from the great progress already happening. There is so much to look forward to in this decade of opportunity, and so much to be done. Contributing makes the load lighter. Together, we can truly shape the future of our nations. Let's deliver a positive future for people, the planet, economy, and the industry, and do it through collaboration. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's been a fabulous morning. I hope you've enjoyed your breakfast. For those of you, hopefully most of you are going on to the conference, we're starting at 9 o'clock sharp, just across the way. So please continue to network, continue to enjoy the breakfast, and I'll see you all over there. And looking forward to a couple of great days of further networking and just really working together, shoulder to shoulder, as the speakers have outlined, to work out how we get there in the next 10 years. What these next 10 years look like is pretty exciting. So thank you all, and I'll see you at the conference.